So what?
We are dedicating this class to Esther Malka Bas, the daughter of Mordechai Hirsch, and the daughter of Basia, whose yahrzeit was today. And this learning should bring an elevation to her soul. Esther Malka. All right, we're going to start with our blessing, and everyone hopefully now knows that we're starting. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Ha'olam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim B'nasan Lanu Es Toraso Baruch Atah Adonai Nosein HaTorah Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Okay. So thank you for joining. Thank you for being also prompt. And thank you, Chava, for posting for everyone else that they should also join. So I thought last week we finished that unit, that two-part series that we were doing. I'm releasing pain. And I thought tonight this week is a very special week. It's a week, a very, very big week in the Chabad calendar. Wednesday and Thursday, the 10th and 11th of the Jewish month of Shvat, the passing of the previous Rebbe, and the ascension to leadership of the current Rebbe. So I thought in honor of that, we can do a talk of the Rebbe, which touches on these dates and also really focuses on women and really focuses on redemption. So I thought it'd be very, very, very appropriate for us as empowered Jewish women to learn this and really see how we are viewed by the Rebbeim, see how the Rebbes look at us, the Jewish women bringing redemption. So this is a talk that the Rebbe gave. This is actually a combination of two talks that the Rebbe gave, the Shabbos before and the Shabbos after the 10th of Shvat in the year 1992. So that means that right around this time of year, it was Shabbos Parshas Boi, which was last Shabbos, and Shabbos Parshas Beshalach, which is this coming Shabbos. So it's literally exactly these days, exactly this energy. And the Rebbe, both weeks, for 2 weeks in a row, the Rebbe focused on Jewish women. And the Rebbe focused on how powerful Jewish women are in general and in terms of bringing redemption. So I wanted to share this talk with you. I don't know if we'll finish it today or not, either this week or next week. And I thought it's really nice for us to remember who we are, to remember our historical role, to know our historical imperative. So the Rebbe begins by talking about one of the innovations of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And I knew Chava would especially be interested in this. And therefore I tried to do a lot of homework and I couldn't find out more than I knew before I started, really. So I'm really sorry, Chava. I did a lot of homework on Dr. Google, and I don't know, I probably should have just gone to a different source and gotten the answer very quickly. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he left Russia, he basically lived in Riga. He lived in Riga, a little bit in Warsaw, back to Riga. So, but he was, most of the time he was in Riga, though he was also in Warsaw. And the years we're talking about here are from 1928 through 1939. In 1939, he was already in Warsaw. He was in Warsaw. He was in the Warsaw ghetto. And through tremendous godly aid, he was smuggled out of the Warsaw ghetto. He was actually smuggled out of the Warsaw ghetto by the German army. But then in 1939, he was already in Warsaw. But from 1928, when the Lubavitcher Rebbe, meaning the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, left Russia after his horrific imprisonment, and he knew he had to get out because he saw that the NKVD, they weren't done with him, and he knew if he stayed around, it would be very dangerous. So when he left Russia, he went to Riga, to Latvia. Now, in Riga, they're formed, and I don't know if this existed before he got, that's what I'm saying, I tried to do some history research and I was totally unsuccessful. but there was a group, a learning group of Jewish women, of Jewish girls, of like Jewish, what we call Jewish teenagers. And these Jewish young women formed a study group to learn Torah, to learn Hasidus. That was very, very innovative in those days. In those days, most women didn't know that much, meaning even with very educated men, the women were pious, but often very ignorant, besides of the laws they needed to know to live a good Jewish life. But in more scholarly ways, they were ignorant. This group of girls wanted to learn. They wanted to study Hasidic texts, which means real deep stuff. And the Rebbe, when I say the Rebbe at that time, that means the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, he very much encouraged them. He actually said a sicha. He said a talk for these girls, for these women, to really give them a very strong push that, yes, you're on the right road, and this is exactly what you should be doing. You should be studying deep Hasidic texts. There's actually a very, one thing I did stumble across in my search was like a very long letter that the Rebbe wrote to a girl in Riga, a Jewish girl who was probably about like 16, 17, and she wrote some philosophical questions, and the Rebbe responds to her with 4 pages. So there was really very much emphasis that the Rebbe Rayatz had on educating these Jewish women, these Jewish girls. And that was very unusual. That was a very big innovation. Until that time, we don't really see Hasidic Rebbes, Hasidic leaders speaking to women and encouraging them to learn Hasidus. We had individual women that maybe had a question and maybe could ask it and maybe get answered, but nothing before was there ever this concept of encouraging Jewish women to learn Torah and to learn the deepest parts of Torah, to learn Hasidus. So the Rebbe says this was a innovation of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, that he was given over to Jewish women and girls, including given over that they should learn Torah, that they should learn Hasidus in general. And the reason why he did this was because he really understood the special quality of the Jewish woman. He understood how special she is. He understood her forte, her strength. Because every Jewish girl becomes a Jewish woman. Every Jewish woman becomes the mainstay of her home, which means everything in the house comes from us. The energy of the house comes from us. Not to put stress, pressure, blame on anyone, but the husband's reality emanates from ours. The children's reality emanates from ours. In the Hebrew, a woman is called, the term in the Hebrew is akeres habayis, which you translate in English as the mainstay of the home. It's a poor translation. The akeres means the ikar, the main, the centrifugal force of a home is the woman. So therefore, the Rebbe is saying about the previous Rebbe, of course he invested in these women. I mean, this is an innovation, but it makes perfect sense because every woman is the mainstay of the home that will come from her. And even if now she's a girl, the girl's going to grow up, the girl's going to have a home. And if now she has a home, she's a woman with a home. She's a woman impacting worlds. So if you invest in the women, you're investing in the whole future of the Jewish people, current and future. And that's why the women are such an important force. So where do we see this? We see this, the Rebbe says, historically. We see historically in the most significant events in our people's history, God put women first. And God putting women first is because they're more important. And the Rebbe quotes two events in Jewish history, two very significant events, and in both of them, the women were before the men. What are those two events? The giving of the Torah and the dedication of the tabernacle in the desert, of the temple in the desert. And in both of those events, women were before men. What do we mean that women were before men? Well, when God was ready to give the Torah to the Jewish people, he told Moses to go speak to the Jews about it. And the verse, it's a very famous verse, so you might have heard of it, is Kosomar leves Yaakov v'saged levnei Yisrael. So you shall say to the house of Jacob, and so shall you tell to the men of Israel. And our sages say the house of Jacob, the house, that means the women. And then B'nai, the men, the sons of Israel, that means the men. So if you look at the order of the verse, God says to Moses, go first to the women, tell the women that God's ready to give the Jews the Torah. They assent, then go to the men and tell them. The second time historically, very shortly after, a few months later, is when they were beginning the construction of the tabernacle, of the temple in the desert. And then all the Jews had this amazing ability to dedicate their possessions, their gold, their silver, their jewels, their dyes, their materials, their cloths, to dedicate to God, to the tabernacle, to God's home on planet Earth. Like, what's more exciting than that? And it says in the verse that the women were there before the men. That both the men and the women gathered their stuff and ran, but the women got there first. So the women first were the ones that dedicated, and then following on their footsteps, the men also dedicated all of their beautiful special possessions for God. So the Rebbe says we see here historically in the most important things in the Jewish people, giving the Torah and constructing God's home on planet Earth, women are there first. Not only were women there first, the Rebbe says, women were there better. How do we see we were there better? In both of these events, we see we were there better. In the giving of the Torah, we see we were there better because very shortly after the giving of the Torah, about 40 days later, there was a tremendous travesty called the sin of the golden calf. 3,000 Jews sinned, or more precisely, 3,000 men sinned. Not one woman sinned. So the fact that 40 days later, a segment of the Jewish population could doubt God, that segment was only the men. Not one woman doubted. Not one woman. So not only did God ask us first, but we received it much more deeply. We so deeply accepted the Torah that no matter what was the divine setup that tempted us to sin, not one Jew sinned with the golden calf. And in terms of the dedicating to the tabernacle, not only were the women there first, we gathered our stuff first, we got there first, but also it says that there was a special skill that only the women had. If you lived in that time, I mean, we did. We're all reincarnations of that generation. We were all there then. Maybe then I had better hands than I have now. I don't know. Because now I wouldn't say crafts is really my thing. But if you lived in the desert, you really wish that crafts was your thing because you were crafting God's home. And the men and the women were all involved in every stage of the operation, except one. There was one very special skill. Don't ask me how they did it. I don't know. That only the woman knew how to do. It was a secret, a woman's secret. They didn't share it with any of the men. And what the women knew how to do was spin the hairs from the goats as it was still on the goats. So they were literally spinning tapestries as the hairs were still on the goats before they were shorn, which was considered an incredible, incredible thing because they were giving. Don't ask me how they did it. I do not know. I wouldn't even know how they did if they cut it, let alone if it was still growing from the backs of the goats. But they were bringing God also from the animal kingdom, from a living animal. And because the hairs were still growing, they were still fresh, they were still supple, they were much more finer than once they were dead hairs. They weren't dead, they were literally alive as they spun them and made these tapestries from the goat hairs that were used to cover the tabernacle. So not only were the women there first, but the women were there better. The woman could give God, not only we could do something the men couldn't, but it was considered a very, very meaningful thing that the woman could do that, again, only the women can do. So what do you think is significant about this? Let's just think for a second, or let's hear your thoughts. Why do you think it's significant? Why did God say to Moses, to Moshe, go first, speak to the woman about the giving of the Torah, and then when you get their consent, go speak to the men? What do you think is the significance of giving the Torah to women first? I mean, it sounds nice, but was it, I mean, there must have been more to it than just sounding nice.
Maybe God knew that the women can persuade their husbands and children to accept Torah.
Oh, that's a nice idea. If I get the women, then everybody else is just going to follow suit because women know how to convince everyone else in the family.
Yes.
That's a nice idea. That's nice. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? Why did God want? I mean, we could have just democratically spoken to everyone at the same time. We don't have to have this gender, women, men. Moses could have gathered all the Jews like he normally did. He normally gathered all the Jews. It wasn't, now I'm gathering the men, now I'm gathering the women. All the Jews he gathered. So he could have gathered all 3 million and said, God, now we want to give you the Torah. Yay. No, here I'm separating women and men, and I'm going first to the women. So Menucha is saying maybe the men would have had cold feet, but the women will get them on board. That's a nice thought. Any other ideas?
Cyril, isn't there a little saying, like a story, or a religious couple got divorced, and both of them married secular people. So as a woman married secular man, he became observant. The man married a secular woman, he became secular.
Yes, it's a story in the Talmud. Yes.
Okay.
For again, just to add to your layers of guilt here. Yes. Not guilt, responsibility. Yes, absolutely. That is true. So therefore, Rivka, you're saying?
We are extremely important. We're very powerful. I'm just like, I am at awe at Jewish women that I know. I mean, we're great.
Right.
We are very, I mean, a lot depends on us.
So you, in a sense, what you're saying encompasses Menucha's answer as well. You're really overlapping with Menucha, but going a little bit beyond. Menucha said, God spoke to the women because then they would get the men on board. And you're in a sense saying that, but broader, maybe it was God just speaking to us first because he's acknowledging our superiority. Maybe he's speaking to us first because he wants us to know that he knows how important we are. And maybe he's speaking to us first because we truly are so impactful. We are going to influence the other people, either as Menucha saying, to get them on board, or just that's our role. Get the women because they get the Jewish people. So yeah, it's very, very, very true. And God's definitely acknowledging it because that is, he knows his kids, his boys and his girls. Any other thoughts? Why do you think the women were spoken to first? Why is that important? Why did God bother to do it that way? Not why he speaks to us versus the men. Of course, we understand how special we are, but he could have just spoken to all the Jewish people at once. He specifically selected it this way. I want to first talk to the women and get their consent, and then we'll talk to the men. Maybe as Rivka's saying, it's also setting up sort of a historical precedent. Like, this is, guys, I just want you to know, this is how it works. We got to get the women first, because the women are the movers and shakers of this people. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on this?
No, maybe man's ego has something to do with the whole picture.
So we want to snatch their ego?
No, Hashem. If he gave it to women, man would say, what? They got it and we didn't?
Oh. So to inspire them because of their ego. You honestly, you never know. There's probably like some and like some and like some. And like what? The women? They're running to give stuff for the tabernacle? Me too. I'm going to run faster. I already have a head start. Well, I'm going to try to run as well. Honestly, what you're saying, I think even more is true for the dedicating. I really think it actually does honestly resonates for the dedicating of the supplies. Because again, here it wasn't that God said to the woman to give first. God told God through Moses told the Jewish people, you have an opportunity now. It's your choice. Nobody has any obligations. Whoever wants can now dedicate whatever they want to God's home. No compulsion, do what you want. And all the Jews were very excited. I mean, what's more exciting than imagine you suddenly could dedicate to God's home and you look through your jewelry box and think what's the most precious thing that you could share with God. It's a very exciting thing. And the men and the women both felt very excited, but somehow the women put their act together faster and they got there. And the men were still probably like looking through their jewels and maybe I should give this, maybe I should give this. I really like this, but it's really nice to give it to God. You know, they were like taking their time a little and then taking what Chava said, maybe, do you hear? The women are already there. What? The women are already there? Oh my gosh, we gotta go. I could totally see that happening. Totally. God knows the truth. We also know the truth. I don't know what men do with these types of talks. They probably skip them. But I do remember very clearly, actually, once, many years ago, I had a group of like young men at my house, probably like, 20-ish year olds. It was by a Shabbos meal, a Friday night meal. And I was sort of pushing them a bit that they have to do more to bring the redemption, to bring Mashiach. And they said to me, don't you know that the Rebbe says the women are the ones that are bringing Mashiach? And I'm like, no, you're not supposed to quote that way. We quote that. You're supposed to also try. I don't know otherwise if they learn these talks. Anyway, but the Rebbe says, it's not just history. All the way back in the antecedents of our people, 3,300 years ago, when God gave us the Torah, when God gave us the ability to build a home for him on planet Earth, then the women were first and the women were better. It's actually been the entire road of the Jewish people. And most specifically, we see this forte of women in terms of bringing redemption. Redemption is very strongly in the hands of the Jewish women. And again, we see this historically, and we've seen it the whole road since. The first opportunity the Jews had for redemption was when they left Egypt. Now we are a reincarnation of that generation. We are a reincarnation of those women. And it says, our sages say this very clearly, it is very oft quoted, so you've probably heard it, in the merit of the righteous women the Jews left Egypt, and in their merit will be redeemed in the future as well. Meaning, we're not totally knocking the men, we're just sort of knocking the men. So there were also, good men that, also did good things. But the overarching energy that made the Jews meritorious for redemption to get out of Egypt was the women. That's what the sages mean. And we're going to discuss later, the Rebbe is going to explain what was it about us that was so different than the men. For now, you'll take it on faith. We're not saying the men were bad, but the women were a lot better. And the woman's special quality is what was the catalyst for redemption, to the degree that actually our sages even say the leader of the Jewish women was Miriam the prophetess, Moses' older sister. And the sages say Miriam, she was the redeemer, which is sort of interesting because we always say Moshe was the redeemer. But the sages say Miriam was the redeemer because Miriam inspired the women, and in the women's merit, we all got out. It wasn't only then. Our sages say every redemption the Jews have ever experienced has been in the merit of the Jewish women. And that's why, like if you think of Purim, there's Esther as the redeemer. Obviously, Mordechai played a very critical role, but Megillas Esther, it's Esther's book. She was the pivotal redeemer. Even in Hanukkah, we speak of Yehudis, that Jewish woman who really self-sacrificed and created tremendous redemption. Of course, she wasn't the only one, but somehow our sages say it was the women. It was the merit of the women that caused the miracle of Hanukkah. It was the merit of the women that caused the miracle of Purim. And similarly, every generation that the Jews experience redemption, it's always the women. I've told this class that whole amazing thing that happened with the doctor's plot and how that one Jewish doctor who wouldn't break down, you remember the very dramatic story? And she was a woman, a Jewish woman. The other doctors were men and they all broke down and she didn't break down. It was superhuman. I mean, it doesn't make sense how she didn't break down, but day after day, she did not break down. And because she didn't break down, and because Stalin was quite stubborn also, and he needed every single doctor to confess, day after day after day, the whole doctor's plot got pushed off, until on Purim when the Lubavitch Rebbe killed Stalin and he died. And then the doctor's plot dissolved because all of his advisors and closest people knew the whole thing was crazy. But if that woman had just signed like everyone else, who knows how many Jewish lives, your parents' lives, your grandparents' lives would have been lost till God took away Stalin. Again, who was it? It was a Jewish woman. So in all the generations, our sages say, redemption always comes through the Jewish woman. And there's a verse that says that the ultimate redemption of the Mashiach will be like the prototype redemption from Egypt. Meaning, it means many things, but it means also in this perspective that just as then it was the women's merit that created salvation for the Jewish people, so also by Mashiach, it will be the merit of the Jewish women that will create the redemption from this final ultimate exile. And the Arizal, if you've heard of the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, he was the second greatest Kabbalist of all times, I would say. The greatest Kabbalist of all times was Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who was interred in Meron. And the second greatest Kabbalist, who lived hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, was the Arizal, who lived in Tzfat. If you ever go to Tzfat, you can actually go. There's at least 2 synagogues that claim to be his synagogue, and probably more. But we do know where he was buried. It's a very, very holy spot to go. Many people go there every day to pray where he's buried. Very, 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 very great Kabbalist, second greatest Kabbalist of all times. And the Arizal says that the generation that will bring the redemption are a reincarnation of the generation that left Egypt. So that means that we are those righteous women. It's not just like those women brought redemption and we're women, so we're also bringing redemption. It's like, no, God said, you're the women that know how to bring redemption. You already brought redemption, so I'm bringing you back to bring redemption. So that's why we all know we've had many previous lifetimes, but we all know we were in Egypt and we were those women. And now we're back to do it again and to bring redemption. So that's the very, very special power of the Jewish woman. And when you're looking at this idea, if our sages are viewing women as this force of redemption, The sages are looking at women and saying, you are the redeemers. That's how we're looked at by the greatest of the Jewish people. So where do you see this in yourself? How do you see in yourself this ability to be a redeemer? This ability of creating redemption? I think it's important to look inward and really try to absorb this in a very personal way. That we're supposed to look at ourselves and understand that we are redeemers. We create redemption. That's what the sages are saying about us specifically, women specifically, and this generation very specifically. We're the redeemers. Where have you experienced this in your own lives? That yes, specifically as a Jewish woman, you have created redemption for yourself, for your families, for other people, for your friends. How do you see yourself as a redemptive force?
To be a spiritual leader in your family first, to show an example to your children and husband and your friends. I mean, everywhere where you have a chance, at work, everywhere, any interaction with other people, just to bring God and be an example.
So you're saying as you live like Menucha does live, you're the forerunner and your husband has to catch up.
Yeah,
You're a good example.
He's here and he can hear you. Yes.
Great. So that's awesome. You're the forerunner and your husband has to catch up to your good example. I said it a second time to make sure he'd hear. And all your children that you've inspired. I remember very clearly asking Gabby once, like, why are you coming and learning with me? She said, because I know that would be the most important thing for my mom. And your friends and your colleagues and your clients. You're saying for each one of us being that woman that looks at herself as, I have the ability to redeem people and I've got to start working by my personal example and by my efforts.
Yes.
Very true. Anyone else? Any thoughts on yourself as the redeemer? As this redemption power?
I'm just looking at it as one mitzvah at a time, you know, just one mitzvah at a time. Because it's difficult for me to influence other people because since I started doing mitzvahs, and I'm trying to influence. I don't do it very well because I get kind of too pushy. You know what I mean? And I really have to rein myself in because it's counterproductive. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just saying to myself, you just do your own mitzvahs, one mitzvah at a time, because it's.
So that's the idea of creating this energy by being also a living example.
Yeah.
So your example, more than your words, should inspire others because your example can't be pushy, but your words might be. Chava, what were you going to add?
And I would like to add that if we have a parallel between now our times and times when Jews left Egypt, you could see that it's a very challenging time and a time when Jews might think that God forgot us, but actually to be strong and believe that God loves us and God takes us out of Egypt, and that this is the time for Mashiach, in spite of a lot of negativities and maybe, I don't know, painful things that happening around, to be strong, strengthen our emunah and our bitachon, and know that Hashem, it's Hashem kindness, and that's the time that we approaching the Mashiach.
What you're saying is this parallel image is not only, it's not, well, Mashiach is coming despite the fact that it's so bad. You're saying the fact that it's so bad could actually be a sign that Mashiach's coming. Very true. Very true. I had a guess. I think I mentioned last week, a guest said at my table, like, where do we see, this whole corona in the 10 plagues? And I'm like, that's a very, that's an interesting thought. I didn't pursue it to figure it out, but yeah, whatever the world's going through, for sure, it's leading to redemption, and we might not be able to figure it out how. When we have the complete revelation, we'll get the whole scoop. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of hard stuff. There's a lot of beautiful stuff, and that's signs of the impending redemption. And there's hard stuff. And we saw both. We saw both by the redemption from Egypt, and we're seeing both now. You're absolutely right. True, absolutely. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on yourself as a redeemer? So either, as Menucha was saying, by your example, by your gentle, positive encouragement of all those around you, or as Rivka's saying, by your quiet, beautiful example of one mitzvah and then another and then another. Just your mitzvah puts out godliness in the air, in the environment, in the home, in the workplace, and then it just sort of trickles to everyone else there as well. So the Rebbe goes on to say that, remember, we spoke about the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe and how he very unusually really emphasized women. Again, it might not sound so amazing. Like, so what's the big deal? Women wanted to learn and he encouraged them to learn, like, because nowadays that is very normal. But in those days, in the late 1920s, it was very, very cutting edge. It was very unusual. Even in the beginning of the Rebbe's leadership, which is in the 1950s, and in the 1960s, as the Rebbe continued to encourage women, it was considered really radical. And we're talking about 20 plus years after the previous Rebbe did that, and in America and in Israel, not just in Europe. And it was considered so radical. So why was the previous Rebbe the first one to do it? And why did he do it? The Rebbe says very simple, because he knew Mashiach was coming. So if he knows Mashiach is coming, if he knows this is the time of the redemption, and he knows women are the redeemers, so that's why he's going to emphasize Jewish women and Jewish women as this centrifugal force, and Jewish women should be learning Torah, and Jewish women should be active. Because if we're the redeemers, he wants to give us the strength to be able to do what we're supposed to do and bring redemption for the world. And to understand this a little more Kabbalistically, in God's energies, there's traditionally, Kabbalistically, 10 divine expressions, what Kabbalah calls spheros. It's 10 ways God's attributes shine. The lowest of the 10 is called sovereignty, Malchus. It's the lowest of the 10. And it's called Kabbalistically the feminine dimension. Meaning, again, just to explain a little bit more so this should make sense, the first 3 of the 10 are intellectual dimensions. And then we have 6 emotional dimensions, and then we have sovereignty. The 6 emotional dimensions are considered God's masculine dimensions. And the 10th and final dimension is considered God's feminine dimension. So notice it's number 10, it's the bottom. And in our world, in this male-female perspective, men reflect God's male dimension, the 6 higher emotive energies, and women reflect God's 10th and final dimension, that of sovereignty. just as the sun reflects God's male dimension, God's emotive dimensions, and the moon reflects God's sovereignty. King David reflected sovereignty. The Jewish people versus the non-Jewish world. The non-Jewish world is God's masculine dimension, and the Jewish people is God's feminine dimension. And in men and women among the Jews, men reflect God's masculine dimension, and women reflect God's feminine dimension. Makes sense? So this is God's 10th, like number 10, bottom of the totem pole. And this dimension, we're told, will be supreme by the revelation of Mashiach. So this dimension, God's 10th and final, referred to as Malchus, Malchut, sovereignty, is the lowest of the 10, and by the redemption will be revealed as the most powerful and most dominant of the 10. And that's the energy of the woman. So the energy of women will actually be the supreme messianic energy. So since our energy is the energy of Mashiach, and since our energy will be supreme by Mashiach, that's why our energy is also what is the catalyst for Mashiach. That's why our energy is what causes Mashiach. So because Kabbalistically, we're the energy of Mashiach, Kabbalistically, we also have the responsibility to use our energy and bring Mashiach. And that's why when the verse says something like, a woman of valor is the crown of her husband. So crown means on top of, higher than the head. So when will that be revealed? By the redemption. Because then the energy of women, God's feminine energy, will be dominant. And then everyone will be able to access their more feminine dimension. So the Rebbe says that this idea we actually see in connection to the passing of the Rebbe Rayatz. Remember, I told you what motivated me to do this was that this Wednesday is the 10th of Shvat, which is the passing of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and therefore the day that began the leadership of the current Rebbe. So the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away. It was Shabbos, Parshas Boy, the 10th of Shvat, which in our calendar this year comes out on Wednesday. So the previous Rebbe did something really cool, really amazing. He wrote, it's a very big accomplishment. I don't know of anyone else that did it. He wrote a Hasidic discourse in honor of his own passing. And that's a pretty cool accomplishment, to write a discourse in honor of your own passing. How he managed to do that was he wrote the discourse officially in honor of two other people's passings, of two women's passings, of his mother and his grandmother. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was very, very close to his grandmother, whose name was Rivka, and who passed away on the 10th of Shvat. And his mother, whose name was Shter Nesara, passed away on the 13th of Shvat, which will come out this year to be Shabbos. So not usually did the previous Rebbe write Hasidic discourses in honor of their passing. But that year, he wrote not just a little discourse, he wrote this mammoth 20-section discourse, a very, very developed, significant discourse of 20 pieces in honor of the passing of his grandmother on the 10th of Shvat. It happened to be that year he passed away on the 10th of Shvat. So we view this discourse as his, like, if you will, living will, as a discourse in which he sort of laid out everything he was telling us as his final words. And the Rebbe, every year after following, every year would explain one section of these 20 sections. The Rebbe did it for 20 years, and then the Rebbe did it for another 20 years, and then the Rebbe, now we're on the third set of 20 years of explaining this discourse that was like the, so to speak, living will of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. So what do we see right away? He wrote the discourse in honor of women. He wrote the discourse in honor of his grandmother's passing and his mother's passing. So when he was looking for an excuse to write this discourse, he right away connected to women. Not only that, but the opening verse in the discourse, which every single discourse that follows, meaning the Rebbe has over 40 discourses explaining this discourse, they all start with the same verse. I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. This is God talking to the Jewish people about entering this world, ultimately for the redemption. And how does he refer to the Jewish people? My sister, my bride. I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. So not only did he write the discourse in honor of two women, he opened up the discourse with a verse where he refers to all of us in our feminine nature. God is saying to the Jewish people, my sister, my bride. Not only that, but what the discourse is talking about is what women do best. The discourse is talking about using this world and making it God's home. Using this world and the physicality of this world and elevating the world as we use it to make it receptive to and expressive of God's energies. That is a feminine gift. That's just something women do better. Just like we see historically we have the patriarchs and the matriarchs, and we see if we look through all the vignettes, all the incidences that happen that are recorded in Torah about them, it's very clear that all the patriarchs were a little remote from this world. And that's why Abraham didn't see the depth of Ishmael's evil. That's why God told Abraham, listen to everything your wife Sarah says, listen to her voice. She's understanding better than you. That's why Isaac couldn't understand and see the depth of evil of Esav, and Rebecca very clearly did. So they had a different relationship to this world. The patriarchs were a little remote, a little too spiritual to really be grounded on planet Earth, which was fine because they had the matriarchs. And the matriarchs were very holy, but they got it. They understood the physical world and they knew how to use it as God wants us to use it to serve God. So it's not only that the previous Rebbe wrote this discourse in honor of women officially, and that he opens up the discourse with a verse referring to the Jewish people as women, but the content of the discourse is really about something that Kabbalistically, and according to Hasidic thought, is the forte of women. This idea of using the world is considered something women are much better at than men. In other words, that women can deal with the world and serve God with the world and refine the world and take the world and give it to God. That's considered something that women have a special gift in, and men not as much. Do you see this? Have you seen this in yourself or in other women you know, as versus men you know? This ability to use the physical and make the physical a vehicle for the spiritual. That women maybe have a better ability to look at the physical and use it as a vehicle for serving God. And we're better at that than the men are. Because that's what Kabbalah says. That's what Hasidus says. But as women, have you seen this? I know it's an empirical truth, but have you seen it in your own experiences?
What comes to mind is maybe preparing for Shabbat. I don't know.
That's a great example. That's a great example. First of all, man would be very lost. It's so much to do, and we do it every week. But you're right. As we prepare for the Shabbat, we are truly in disguise. It's camouflage, because we're shopping and we're chopping and we're peeling and we're cooking. And it's all about God. But it looks like a lot of food prep. And like, my gosh, these people make these elaborate meals every weekend, like 4-course meals twice. But that's just normal for us because it's Shabbat. So that's definitely like a really a great example of that. That's just what we do. And we're taking the physical and using it as a vehicle for God in just a regular basis.
Cleaning for Pesach.
For all those that don't run away to Florida. Yes, that is a very, very, very expressive example. You know, sometimes you think like, what was God thinking? And like, well, he knew what every one of his laws was going to create in terms of the work, in terms of the very physical work, and it's all godly. I think that's something really actually probably pretty unique to Judaism, that we serve God, like Vega says, with cooking and shopping, and Rivka's throwing in and clean, plus lots of other things, plus lots of cooking and lots of shopping and lots of so much. And that's all a service to God. And it's a service that we're saying women naturally do. It's something women do. It's a woman's way of really taking the world and just doing it for God. Because if you weren't doing it for God, why in the world would you do that? It's not called spring cleaning. You know, that's not what paying for Passover is. That is just because God has his whole series of wills that we do all these things that are so much using the world in a way that we really are taking the world and giving it to God. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on this idea of that women uniquely have an ability? So it could be, you could say, well, can't a man cook and clean? Not the same. Really not the same. Why not? Because it's part of our skill set. It's part of our ability to use the physical as a vehicle for the spiritual. So a man under duress can cook, and a man under duress can probably also clean somewhat. But it's just not the same, because it's not really them most of the time for most men. They could do it, but sort of like, actually, like it says in Egypt, that when the Egyptians wanted to torture the Jews, they switched their work, and they gave the men women's work and the women men's work. And you could say, well, for a woman to be doing man's work, you know, even more arduous physical labor, we understand why that was so torturous. But why would it be torturous if the men, instead of, you know, breaking their backs building pyramids in the Egyptian sun, why they were sewing, you know, cleaning, taking care of children? It sounds much easier. And it's like, but it's not their thing. So it was very, 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 it was in an emotional level, sort of like on a psychological level, it's probably a better way to phrase it. On a psychological level, it was more difficult because it was so much not their skill set, so much not their thing. It was so difficult for them to do. And this is what our sages say was part of the psychological torture the Egyptians did to the Jews when they were enslaved in Egypt. It wasn't to get more productivity out of them. It was just to hurt them. They did many things, not for productivity, just to hurt us. And that was another example. Now, obviously, of course, you can have these exceptional men that are unusual and wired a little bit differently and enjoy it and are very good at it. We're talking about the average man, even if he does it, it's not his thing. And it is a woman's thing for most women, one way or another. The same idea, we have a better sense of beauty than a man. It's just more us. We're just more able to use this physical world. And as such, Kabbalah and Hasidus is saying, the fact that we're so good at using this world and understanding this world means we have a natural ability to give this world to God. But if a man's a godly man and a little detached, he also is not as skilled to take this world and give it to God, which is why we're here, which is how we bring Mashiach. It's a little, okay, we will stop at this point. So we didn't conclude this thought, so I guess we'll finish it off next week. But basically what we've come to at this point is understanding in terms of our soul energy, because we come from God's feminine dimension, why we're so connected to redemption. Historically, because of what we've accomplished in the past and who we truly are, why we're so connected to redemption, and how the previous Rebbe, his passing, which was linked with this Hasidic discourse on so many levels, is connected to women. The fact that the discourse was written in honor of women, the fact that the discourse's first verse is referring to the Jewish people as women, the fact that the discourse is talking about the Jewish people doing the woman's job of giving this world to God, it all brings out how connected he was. This is his passing, this is his climax, and how connected he was and it was to women. Now, we don't yet totally know why. So for that, it's to be continued, God willing, next week. Thank you so much for joining. It should be a special week. As I said, there's a lot of special energy this week. And even though we haven't finished the whole idea, we've learned enough to know that you should know you're all very, very, very special. We are all very, very special. God invested us with a lot of power, a lot of responsibility, a lot of trust. You guys brought redemption before. I'm sending it back to planet Earth. You are bringing redemption. And we start by bringing redemption in our own world, for ourselves, in our homes, in the people in our world, and understanding that even though we'd like to just pass the buck, it stops right here. Because we're the redemptive force. We're the ones that have the power. We're the ones that are getting our act together and making it happening for the whole world, for everyone else as well. Thank you so much for joining. You should have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful week. And thank you for all the people I got to see their faces. So, so, so nice.
So question, are you planning to continue Shabbos?
Yes, I should have brought the book. I think the reason I didn't was because I was thinking I was just going to push and finish this talk, so it would take a while, but I got so little. I got like not too much, I got through 3 out of the 8 sections of the talk, so that's why I didn't push. So I really could have done Shabbos now, but I didn't. But since you mentioned it, let's share an idea of Shabbos to remind ourselves and pick up that piece as well. So what I've been learning recently in the laws of Shabbos, because I try to learn the laws of Shabbos every day personally, because there are so many laws. So just everyday learning just sort of keeps you a little focused on the laws. So there are a whole bunch of laws of Shabbos that have to do with, it's actually based on a verse in the prophets in Isaiah, that how we walk, how we talk, and our activities all have to be different on Shabbos than on the weekday. They all have to be, as we call them, Shabbostic, which means they all have to look different. So in a very practical way, your walking on Shabbos should not be running, should be a more leisurely pace, a more relaxed pace. The idea is during the week, we're busy, we're going here, we're going there, we're going there. Shabbos means stop. turn inward, talk to God, pray, learn, eat. You're not running anywhere. It's Shabbos. So that actually creates lots of laws. So therefore, you're not allowed to run on Shabbos. You're actually not allowed to engage in any physical exercise on Shabbos. That's not acting in this refined, leisurely, relaxed, dignified Shabbos way. So you're not allowed to run unless you have to run to do a mitzvah. Like you're late for the prayer service, you are allowed to run to catch that prayer service, or you want to hear the Torah reading and you're late, you are allowed to run for the Torah reading. But just to run because you enjoy running, no, not on Shabbos. On Shabbos, we walk. And many other laws that have to do with that. Our speech on Shabbos has to be different, which means on Shabbos, we're not allowed to, in an explicit way, discuss mundane pursuits that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. For example, you could say, I'm going to Florida. You can't say, I'm flying to Florida, because you're not allowed to take a plane trip on Shabbos, but you're allowed to go. Well, obviously you're not going to walk to Florida, but that's okay, because then you're not using words that imply things one's forbidden to do on the week. You can't say, I'll drive over to visit you, because we're not allowed to drive on Shabbos. Well, I'm not talking about Shabbos, I'm talking about on Sunday, but we don't do that on Shabbos. You're not allowed to say that during the week. You could say, I'll visit you. You can't say, I'll drive and visit you. And a myriad of other laws that all revolve around that point, that our speech on Shabbos has to be, again, the word is Shabbostic. It has to be only words that one can say on Shabbos, which ideally means words about Shabbos, words about God, words about beautiful Torah thoughts you learned. You could talk about the food, of course, but not words that have to do with, for example, you can't make any business transactions on Shabbos, including with your speech. So it would be considered like one, let's say one was, one came to a synagogue and they hadn't purchased a seat for the high holidays. They're not allowed to say, okay, I'm going to buy this seat. That's a business transaction. They're not allowed to do on Shabbos. You can't conclude, let's say you wanted to hire someone, a friend of yours, to sew for you, to paint for you, to do a print job for you. You could talk to them in very general terms about what they do, or even about your needs, but you can't say, okay, you'll do this job for me, without even mentioning a financial end of exactly how much you're paying them. You're not allowed to make a business transaction on Shabbos, even with your speech. Your speech has to be speech of Shabbos. And what you're doing, you can't do anything that would, even though it's not technically prohibited, it's prohibited because it's too obviously breaking the spirit of Shabbos. And again, there's each of these, I'm just giving a few examples off the top of my head. I mean, I'm giving like the more famous examples, but each of these has myriads of laws. So for example, you can't on Shabbos do anything to prepare for after Shabbos. So for that reason, after your lunch meal on Shabbos, you can't wash the dishes. Well, Friday night you can wash the dishes because you'll need them the next day. But after your lunch meal, you can't wash the dishes because you're not going to need those dishes again. And then you're preparing for after Shabbos. You're not supposed to make your bed Shabbos morning, because the next time you need your bed is probably going to be Saturday night. So you'd be preparing for after Shabbos. Let's say there's a big sale in a store. So you're thinking, well, I want to walk to the store. So as soon as, it's like Black Friday, but Black Friday is Friday, but this is a Saturday night version of the story. I want to be there ready to jump into the store the second Shabbos is over. Not allowed to. I'm not buying anything. I'm just standing outside the store. If you're clearly standing outside the store to walk into the store on Saturday night, you're not allowed to do that. Or similarly, I need to catch a bus. Well, you can't walk, you didn't go on the bus. You're walking to the bus station, you're standing there just waiting. You're not allowed to do that. Now, Again, you could, let's say you walked in that area, sort of taking a walk around, so it's not obvious, then it's okay. Because all these things, if they're not explicit, it's okay. That's why I said you could say, I'll visit you, but you won't say, I'll drive to visit you. So I'm going to Florida, but you're not saying I'm flying to Florida. So if you happen to be if you're window shopping, I don't think it's the most Shabbostic pursuit, but according to the letter of the law, you could look in the windows and admire the items because that just gives you pleasure. Now, let's say you're looking in the windows because you need to buy something and you're really checking out what to buy. Well, if it just looks like window shopping, it's okay. Oh, this is nice. Oh, this is nice. Oh, this is nice. Really, in your mind, you're checking it all out, but you don't look like you're checking it all out. It's okay. But if you look like you're checking it all out, how much does that cost? Oh, that's a little bit too much. Oh, that, how much does that cost? Yeah, I think that actually fits my budget. Now that's forbidden. Why? Because you're clearly planning to do something which is prohibited on Shabbos, to make a purchase. So those three concepts, how we go, how we talk, and our pursuits are all based on one verse from Isaiah, from which there are myriads of laws that how we go on Shabbos should be different, should be in the manner of Shabbos. How we talk on Shabbos should be different, should be in the manner of Shabbos. And our pursuits on Shabbos should be different. They should be in the manner of Shabbos. So thank you, Chava, for reminding me. And God willing, next week I'll just bring the book myself and we'll continue where we're up to. Thank you so much for joining. You should have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful week, knowing who you are and what you're capable of and what God's waiting for from us, from all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.